They run around the far turn and turn into the stretch for the final time past the lakes and flowers. They straighten away 1938 to 2013. A final eighth of a mile, 75 years down to 12 seconds. Depreciable is the leader. He's a length and a half in front of Dan Derrick. Woodman's Luck in the center of the racetrack. Depreciable reaches. Woodman's Luck trying to gun him down. Depreciable, Woodman's Luck, Depreciable, and Woodman's Luck. A photo finish in the final race. It comes down to a camera close-up. 75 great years at Hollywood Park. That's a wrap.
All right, welcome back. This is the Racing Rundown Podcast, wherever you may be, however you may be making us part of your day. Thanks so much. I'm your host, Jack Sargent. Today we are joined by former Hollywood Park track announcer, current Oaklawn Park track announcer, one of my absolute favorite guys to listen to whenever he's calling a race, Vic Stauffer. Vic, how are you doing today?
I am doing terrific. It's sad to hear you say former announcer at Hollywood Park, but all of our hearts were broken back in 2013, but we have to move on, especially in this business, and so I'm blessed to be at Oaklawn now.
I know how it feels. My hometown racetrack, Suffolk Downs, had their last weekend of live racing. You guys know I was there for the Saturday meet that was actually shortened by rain. So I actually waiting for the final race. I was remembering back to your final race call at Hollywood Park, which, by the way, you nailed that. We'll get to that later in the interview, though. But just to say that right off the bat, you absolutely nailed that final race call.
Well, that's nice of you to say. That call was a work in progress for about 6 months because we knew in that last season when the final race was going to be, and I had all kinds of different incarnations of what I was going to do and say, and really hadn't decided completely up until literally about 30 minutes before the last race. I called all kinds of announcer friends, Michael Rona, Larry Comas, and others, and hadn't really completely decided on what to do with that call until they came out on the racetrack for the last race. I had certain ideas in my mind, and thankfully it went well.
All right, so I guess the age-old question that I have to ask everyone that comes on the show is, how'd you get started in horse racing?
Well, my family really didn't have anything to do with horse racing. My grandfather owned a couple of horses at the old Caliente back in Tijuana, Mexico. But I grew up in San Diego, and in the summertime, we would go out to Del Mar, and my friends and I would be at the races, and I just felt super comfortable with it, and I felt like I knew that I wanted to be a part of it in some fashion. And that's when the legendary great announcer Harry Henson, rest in peace, was calling the races at Del Mar, and I found myself more in tune to listening to what Harry had to say than my buddies. They were trying to pick a winner or checking out the girls, and I did too, but I really was so entranced by listening to Harry and the excitement that he brought to the race calls and all of that it's really an incredible blessing when you're 15 years old that you know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I went to work at the racetrack first on the backside as a hot walker and a groom and all of that, but always knew that I would matriculate up into the front side. And what an incredible thing to be a young man and know for sure what you're going to do with your life. And I wouldn't change places with anybody. I've been so blessed.
Did you know then, or figure out soon after, that you wanted to be in the media part of horse racing, not directly involved with the horses as in hands-on stuff?
Well, I learned it pretty quickly because I'm too lazy to be on the hands-on part of it. That's 365, 24/7 with those horses, and that is really a labor of love and a hard way to make a bad living. And God bless all the people that do take care of the race horses. But I found myself wanting to be in the air conditioning and on the front side and get a free program and lunch in the press box. And so I went to work for the Daily Racing Forum, and that got me the exposure of seeing other people in the media side of it. And then eventually it evolved into race calling. I love the race horses, but I don't love them that much. Not where you have to get up at 4:30 in the morning, 365, 24/7. Not working for me.
I like this guy. I have the same mindset as him. So when did you first decide that you wanted to be a race caller?
pretty much from the very beginning, like I said, when I was listening to Harry call the races, and I, uh, I I realized that that I couldn't be a jockey and I wasn't going to be a trainer, and working at the racing farm was okay, but there wasn't really any kind of style to it where you could impart your own philosophies and theories and excitement and all of that. And so I couldn't pinpoint the exact day or anything like that, but I could say that that the inspiration for that was certainly Harry Henson, and not only the inspiration, but he helped me. I would drive down into the old Caliente racetrack in Mexico on the weekends, and excuse me, and make practice race calls into a tape recorder, and I would bring them to him at Del Mar, and he would listen to them, and they were awful. They were terrible. And but Harry would give me encouragement, and he wouldn't tell me how bad they really were, even though I know in retrospect how bad they were. And I can honestly say, without his backing and his literal help, because he set it up so I could practice on the roof at Del Mar in the summer times rather than having to go into Mexico on the weekends. I have Harry Henson to thank for becoming a race caller, no doubt about it.
Where was your first job as a race caller?
My first job was as the main announcer was at Detroit Racecourse in 1984. I had worked very briefly as the backup announcer at the reopened Garden State Park in 84, but then when the job came open at DRC, Detroit Racecourse, it's just no longer there. That was my first job as the full-time announcer, and I was there for 3 years.
Now, when did you develop, because I know a lot of announcers have their catchphrases. You mentioned Harry Henson. Harry Henson's was, so-and-so horse is the winner by whatever the margin of victory was. Everyone knows Dave Johnson's and down the stretch they come. Did you have anything that you necessarily wanted to be that you would say in every single race, or in at least most races that you called?
No, not necessarily in every race. I did evolve, and I don't really know where it came from, but I will say and I probably only do it maybe a handful of times a year, I'll say that a horse is straight and strong, and if anything, that's probably what I'm best known for. I only do it in graded stakes, and I only do it when it's actually true, where the horse is in fact straight and strong. I certainly don't have any kind of day-to-day catchphrases that I use. I try to let the race dictate to me, and if something pops into my mind, I'll say it. But to have something, preconceived that I'm going to say and plug it in a particular time in a horse race, I tend to not do that.
Something that I usually hear you say a lot, and obviously because it doesn't necessarily happen in every race, but something that I hear you say a lot is so-and-so horse is trying to gun down the leader. So whatever the leader's name is. Mm-hmm. Is that something that formulated through your years of calling races?
Yeah, I guess it did. It's interesting that you say that you hear me do it often, because I don't really realize that I do it often. If I do, I'll keep that in my mind, because I'll try to do it less often, because there's all kinds of different ways that you can describe a horse trying to catch the leader. So if I've been saying gun down the leader, I'm going to switch and start saying catch or run down or whatever, because I definitely don't want to say that too often. And the fact that you have now said that I say it often means that I'm probably not say it as often. I don't want to be predictable.
I wouldn't necessarily say that I hear it. I mean, I've heard it often in some of your better very good race calls, I should say.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm 47,000 race calls into this and still trying to make the first one that I'm really happy with or that I think was perfect. I don't think that's going to happen. Can't make a perfect race call. And when you have been doing it as long as I have, you'll always find something that a word or a phrase or a timing or whatever that you could do it a little differently. But that's nice of you to say. I appreciate that.
Who were some of the really good horses that you saw in the early days of your career as a race caller?
Well, I would say probably the best horse that I ever called would be Ghost Zapper. I called him only a couple of times when he broke his maiden at Hollywood Park, and then he would go on and win the Breeders' Cup Classic. that year in Dallas when they ran at Lone Star. He's probably, if you just go by talent and if you restrict it to races that I have called, he's probably the best horse that I ever called. Followed closely maybe by Medaglia d'Oro. And then you get into the ones that were certainly incredibly talented, but kind of known more for their flair and all of that, rather than being the best ever. And then we think about horses like Lava Man and of course Zenyatta. I would venture to guess that Lava Man's not the best horse I ever called, but what a story! Claimed for $25,000 and he ran out $5.5 million. And then, of course, the great Zenyatta, which I owe such an incredible debt of gratitude to her. You know, I called 8 of her 19 wins, and people say, "Oh wow, you know that those calls you made with Zenyatta were really great." No, they weren't. They were just me describing what she was doing. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to be in a position to try to describe to the world what I was seeing when this brilliant mare was doing her thing, and so she's certainly high on the list, no doubt.
When did you first get the opportunity to begin to call races at Hollywood Park?
2001 was my first year there. They had gone through several announcers. Luke Kreitboss, rest in peace, was there, and then Michael Rona. And then Chris Katulak came in, and he was just there for a couple of years, and he moved on. And then the job became available in 2001. And the man that was in charge of the racetrack I'd known for many, many years. His name is Rick Bedeker, and he's now the executive director of the California Horse Racing Board. And he offered me the job, and it didn't take very long for me to accept it. It was certainly a dream come true.
Now, you called some great moments at Hollywood Park. Obviously, we'll get to talking about Zenyatta and some of the other great horses that you called for. But one of the early great moments in your time at Hollywood Park was Chris McCarron's last race, going out a winner, and not allegedly other jockeys letting him win, like a case with Johnny Longden. Came Home was the 100% best horse on that day. What was going through your mind when Chris McCarron was coming down the stretch and this was the last race that he was ever going to ride in? And did you have anything in mind that you were going to say?
No, in that particular case, no. Whenever you know you're making a race call that could easily be listened to 10, 12, 50, 100 years from now, from the time it took place, basically what's going in your mind is don't screw it up. Don't say something stupid that people will be able to go back and listen to. I have had times in my career where I have planned out particular things that I would say, and sometimes I say them and sometimes I don't, depending on how the race breaks. In that particular case, I really hadn't planned out what I intended to say, and it was also a stakes race. It was the Swap Stakes. And so as important as Chris McCarron's final ride being the focal point of that race, it was, anytime you're calling a graded stake, it needs to be, even if it's McCarron's last ride, it needs to be about that horse that's winning a graded stake at a major racing facility like Hollywood Park. The horses are more important than the jocks, even in a particular case like that. And so I didn't want to take away from Came Home, so much so that I made the entire focus on Chris McCarron. And I think it went okay. I think it went okay. I get people to this day that tell me that was one of the things they like best about what I've done in my career, and that's very gratifying because Chris is a good friend to this day, and it was really fun to be a part of that. And then after the race, I had actually called around to, I would say, about 50 announcers around the country and asked them if they would contribute to the Permanently Disabled Jockeys Fund. And so after that race, I got to run downstairs, and we had put together a check from all of us announcers. I think it was about for like $3,000 or so, something like that. And I got to go into the winner's circle and present it to Chris. So that was a very gratifying thing. And my fellow announcers were the ones that made that possible.
Now, fast forwarding a few years, you mentioned you had the privilege to call some of the great Zenyatta's races. When she won her first race, did you recognize that this is a horse that had some serious talent? Or when was that moment when you realized this isn't just the average, mare that runs on a normal day at Hollywood Park?
It was in her second race. Her first race was sprinting. David Flores was on her. Many people don't remember that David Flores rode her for the first 3 races of her life before Mike Smith and her became acquainted. And her first race was okay. She was 5-1, and she won sprinting and did it impressively, but nothing that would really make you think that she was going to go on to be the kind of mare that she turned out to be. But her second race was truly breathtaking, and she didn't break at all. She was in against a good first allowance condition field of horses, some accomplished horses. I think Bobby Frankel had one in there and a couple others. And she completely toyed with that field. She looked like a 26-year-old Jackie Joyner-Kersee against 15-year-old kids that are running in junior high school. And it was that day and that particular race where I took a shot too, because I said that I thought she was going to be a future superstar, which is a terrific call if you're right, and it's terrible if you're not. But in that particular case, it was pretty obvious, and she proved me right, and the rest was history.
Now, I'm going to just tell a quick story that you might actually get a kick out of. In November, when I first got the idea for this, I was on a retreat, and this is the kind of stuff that goes through your head when you're awake past 2 in the morning, because they didn't let us go to bed until sometime after 2, and so I'm awake laying in bed, absolutely fried mentally, and I was thinking about this, and I had just recently watched the Zenyatta win compilation, and as I was sitting there, the 2 people that I was thinking of getting on this were you and David Flores, so that's actually kind of interesting that you mentioned David Flores. So you've been someone that I've been wanting to get, that I've wanted to have on the show for a long time.
Well, that's nice of you to say. It's amazing how to this day, and certainly even back then, the allure of the Kentucky Derby can change careers, because David Flores had to make a decision before the 4th race of Zenyatta's career whether he was going to ride a horse called El Gato Malo in a prep for the Kentucky Derby. I think it was the Bluegrass, something like that. Or he was going to ride Zenyatta in what would have been her second stakes race. And I've talked to David about this over the years, and he wanted to have, he thought that horse could go on and be a player in the Kentucky Derby. So he had to give up the mount to Mike Smith, and needless to say, wasn't the best decision he's ever made, but it tells you about how important 2 jockeys winning the Kentucky Derby is. And that pull to try to win a race like that is what cost him the mount on Zenyatta.
Oh, that's actually a story that I did not know, so that's interesting. So the next time that you saw Zenyatta at Hollywood Park was in the My Lady Stakes. How much of a jump had you seen in her from the win in that allowance race to her winning a major stakes race like that?
To be honest with you, not much. I think that obviously you're going to go through your conditions. She wasn't a sprinter, so her first race sprinting, when in retrospect it's surprising that she won that race. But the allowance, the race that she ran in the second start of her life, that race would have won the Milady. So I think she was always just as good as she was at any point. Now, obviously, as she grew and she matured and she got older, she got a little bit better. But it wasn't like she took some sort of quantum leap forward in the Milady. I think she was good enough to beat a field like that. Probably could have done it first start out, as talented as she was. And that's one thing about Zenyatta that people do give credit to, but I don't think they give enough credit to, and that's John Shirops. Many, many, many horsemen would not have had the career with Zenyatta that he did, but he understood how important it was to let her grow into herself. She never started as a 3-year-old. And so when John realized that and brought her along very, very slowly, and when the Mosses trusted John into knowing what they would ultimately happen with her, and then when Mike Smith got on board and he became part of the team, if you think about all of the aspects and all of the dynamics that went into it, it really was an amazing collaboration. And then consider the fact that they had retired Zenyatta, and the Mosses and Dottie and Gordo and all of the people involved with Zenyatta brought her back again out of retirement to run again and try for her second Breeders' Cup Classic. That just shows the incredible sportsmen that they were, and how they wanted to share this great mare with her adoring fans, and believe me, she had adoring fans, and still do to this day. So it's one of those situations where everything comes together, and it makes for a legendary story. And I played a very small role in it, but I'm going to take as much credit for it as I possibly can.
It's great to have your name written aside one of the greatest horses to ever do it ever. Going back to that 2010 year when Zenyatta did come out of retirement, she ran a couple races at Hollywood Park. The first of those was the Vanity Handicap, where she went up against a very tough horse in St. Trinian's. Did you think that in that stretch drive she wasn't going to get there? And were there ever any moments where you thought that, Zenyatta is not going to get the head bob?
Yeah. The St. Trinian's was in an amazing form at that point in her career. And Mike Mitchell had her ready to run the race of her life. And I knew for a fact what Mike Mitchell had told Martin Garcia to do, and that is to keep an eye on Mike Smith and keep an eye on Zenyatta up until they get to the 3/8 pole, and then try to put some separation in between those two. Don't worry at all about the horses that are in front. Just ride the race like it's you and Zenyatta. And Martin Garcia did exactly what he told him to do. And so St. Trinian's opened up at the top of the stretch. And the thing that's most amazing about that Vanity, when you go back and look at it, Zenyatta ran down a horse that was running away from the rest of the horses in St. Trinian's. So that, without a doubt, was her most remarkable win. At the 16th pole, I knew she was going to get there because she just was Queenie, and she does that. But at the quarter pole, I thought St. Trinian's was going to break the streak.
Now, the Ladies' Secret Stakes is a race that's normally run at Santa Anita, but in 2010, it was run at Hollywood Park because of construction. When did you find out that race is going to be run at Hollywood Park, and that it
actually wasn't construction? It was the Magna Entertainment, which is now known as the Stronach Group, had bought Santa Anita, and at Santa Anita for many years, for about 40 years, they ran what was called the Oak Tree meeting. And Oak Tree is a group of people that were put together philanthropically to run a race meet every year, where all of the proceeds of the race meet would go to horse charities. And when Magna, which is now the Stronach Group, came in, they decided that they didn't want to avail the racetrack for Oak Tree. They wanted to run the dates under their own name. So Oak Tree was a meet without a home. And what happened was Hollywood Park decided and accepted to take those Oak Tree dates on. It's something they only did 1 year. And when that happened, that's why the Ladies' Secret that particular year was run Hollywood Park.
Thank you for catching me on that. I actually did not know that. Where I read that, it said it was construction, which kind of surprised me because I'd never heard of something like that. But thank you for catching me on that. But what were your thoughts when you found out that the Ladies' Secret was going to be run at Hollywood Park and Zenyatta was going to be there?
Well, I was just thrilled and honored to be able to have another race that I could call of hers. That was a race that, had it been run at Santa Anita, certainly Trevor Denman would have called it. And there was actually some question before that meet as to whether or not Trevor would come back over to Hollywood Park and call the Oak Tree meet. And I have to thank the president of Hollywood Park, Jack Liebau. I was his guy, and he said, hey, if you're going to run a meet at our racetrack, then Vic Stauffer's our announcer, and we want him to call the races. And so Oak Tree said okay, and I got to call those races, or I would have only had 7 winning calls of Zenyatta instead of 8. So Mr. Liebau had a lot to do with that, and he backed me in that particular situation, because there were many people that were pushing for Trevor to call that meet, and he had called it before in the past, but only at Santa Anita. They were pushing for him to come over and call it at Hollywood Park, and Mr. Liebau said no.
They're off. Hard to Be Good, Dark Beauty, and Lady LeCaine all show speed. Cafe Katie, Pleasant Thunder in a tight spot, having a good time right up with the leaders. Lady LeCaine outfoots them to the clubhouse turn, and she'll cross and clear from her outside post. Lady LeCaine, aggressive now, and she opens up 3 lengths. Hard to Be Good and having a good time. Race together second and third. It's another 3 back to Dark Beauty and Cafe Katie. Now 7 from Lady LeCaine, who's 4 lengths in front to the backstretch. Pleasant Thunder is sixth and last, and she's 9 lengths behind Lady LeCaine. 5 furlongs from the wire, and it's Lady LeCaine trying to slow it down a bit now, take a breather up the backstretch, and she leads by 4 lengths from Having a Good Time and Hard to Be Good, second and third, and we are in the midst of an earthquake here in Southern California as Lady LeCaine goes past the half-mile pole, and Lady LeCaine is the leader. 2.5 lengths further back. By the way, folks, I want you to know I love you all, and horse racing was my first love. Off to the far turn, we hope. Lady LeCaine leads by a length and a half from Having a Good Time in second. Hard to Be Good is third. Cafe Katie to the outside is fourth. Now between horses goes Dark Beauty and Pleasant Thunder, and that wasn't thunder, folks. That was the ground shaking. Lady LeCaine still the one to beat at the top of the stretch. Better make this my greatest race call. Lady LeCaine, here comes Pleasant Thunder down the center of the race course. And at the rail, Dark Beauty, and it's down to these two. Dark Beauty just in front. Pleasant Thunder to the outside. Dark Beauty's a neck in front. Pleasant Thunder alongside. These two come to the wire in a shaker.
Blame was ridden by Garrett Gomez. And in my estimation, it's truly one of the great race rides ever. Because if you go and you watch that race and you follow Blame around the racetrack, there was about a half a dozen, if not more, different decisions that Garrett had to make at critical points in the race. And if he didn't make them all, 7 for 7, 8 for 8, if he had only been 7 out of 8, then Zenyatta would have caught Blame. Truly one of the great race rides ever. And all of those things had to go. And even with that, Zenyatta only got beat a neck, and she was in front of Jump After the Wire. So I think it's, ironically, if you consider the fact that she ran 20 races, won 19 of them, her best race might have been the one race that she didn't win, given all of the different factors that went into it. Especially, I think, go back and watch that, and your listeners should do that too. Go back and watch the first 100 yards of that race. She looked like she was blinded by the lights, and all of the other things that conspired. I was more proud of her in that defeat than I was in any of her wins.
Now, we did get sidetracked earlier talking about Zenyatta. I'm going to go back to 2005. You're calling race 2 on the 6th of June, 2005, and all of a sudden the earth starts shaking. And obviously, California is known for its earthquake. There was just an earthquake there yesterday. Expressed concern for anyone who was involved in that. But what was your thought when the earth started shaking in the middle of a race call?
Well, my very first thought was that was it. I was going to go down with the ship. It was a 4.9 magnitude quake, but on the roof at Hollywood Park, which is a 75-year-old structure at the time, it felt like an 8.9 magnitude, and that entire building was swaying back and forth, literally swaying. And I think, in retrospect, the fact that it had been through all of those earthquakes and it had been so structurally sound and allowed to sway during earthquakes is what kept that structure up. So I'll give you a little inside information about that race call. When they went into the far turn, and it looked like we weren't going to go down in a heap, at the beginning of that meet in 2005, as a matter of fact, on opening night, I lost my father. And so it wasn't all that long after he had passed. And when I thought I was going to, and going to go meet him in heaven, the very first thought I had in my mind was to say something to my dad. And which would have been a great race call had I died. But if I didn't die, it was going to sound kind of schmaltzy. So what I intended to say, and what first popped into my mind to say, was, Dad, I love you. Horse racing you were always my first love. And what I decided not to say that, and that's how I ended up changing it and saying, I just want to let you know all that I love you, and horse racing was my first love. So that was kind of an adjustment on the fly. Great call if I die, not such a great call if I don't die.
Obviously, it was probably very unnerving when you're in the middle of doing your job and the earth starts moving.
Yeah, it was unnerving. It was also kind of cool. That was my 15 minutes.
Now, we did talk a little bit earlier about Hollywood Park, but when did you first find out that Hollywood Park was going to be shutting down?
Well, officially, we found out in April of 2013, where it was official that there was going to be the summer meet and then the winter meet, and that was it. but there had always been, we knew that Hollywood Park was going to shut down, and we didn't know how long it would last. And frankly, it lasted a lot longer because of Jack Liebau and the horseman that he was. We were all prepared for it to shut down as early as 2010 or 11. And it was only because of Mr. Liebau did it extend on into 2013. But I knew for at least 6 months, maybe even longer, that at the end of the fall meet that year, that was going to be it.
I know Todd Trupp was talking a little bit about it on when TVG was there for the final day at Hollywood Park, but did you have any people that during the course of time between the announcement of the track going to be closing permanently at the end of the meet and to when it actually closed, did you have any people like not necessarily seek you out, but talk to you about stories of the track and how much they loved coming and how they wanted to see it again before it closed?
Hundreds. Yeah. Everybody. Just from people sending emails or writing letters or running into you at the racetrack when you were walking in. I mean, everybody, to this day, I still get people that talk about the closing of Hollywood Park and how much they miss it. And so it was, without a doubt, it was the focal point of both of those meets, and certainly the fall meet where it closed, without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, when you have a racetrack like Hollywood Park that was open for 75 years with all of the great horses and horsemen and jockeys and all of that, and it's all coming to an end, it's really all anybody did talk about that last year.
Now, Hollywood Park did close in that December, but you did get one last great horse to run at Hollywood Park in that December, and it was in the final running of the Hollywood Futurity, and the horse's name was Shared Belief. He was a gelding owned by one of my favorites, Jim Rome. Could you tell that Shared Belief was going to be something special in that race?
You know, you say that there was one last great horse, but actually on that weekend there were two. Because in addition to Shared Belief running on that weekend, the last stakes race ever run and won at Hollywood Park was the King Gloria Stakes, which was won by California Chrome. So don't leave him out. The Shared Belief, yeah, you knew he was going to be pretty good. Jerry Hollendorfer had a tremendous knack for looking for horses like that and buying them, and he bought that horse off of Jed Josephson. And the thing about Shared Belief is that everybody always knew that he kind of had feet that were a little bit shaky, to be honest. But Jerry did a great job of keeping him together. That's why he started at Golden Gate Fields in the beginning of his career, because they had the Tapeta up there, the synthetic track, and it was easier on his feet. And but Jerry bought him off of Jed Josephson, and certainly he turned out to be a great horse. But perhaps more importantly, it became a bigger deal because of Romy own a piece of him, and how he opened up his experiences with Shared Belief, how he opened them up to the world.
Now, you did mention a little bit earlier your preparation for the final race call. Did you have a lot of pressure on yourself to, like, don't blow this?
Of course. Tremendous amount of pressure. As well as it's gone, because it went well, I would be well known for being the guy that completely botched the last race call at Hollywood Park. So I probably felt more pressure, self-imposed pressure too. But without a doubt, I probably felt more pressure and more responsibility in that race call than anyone I've ever made. No doubt about it. Because you only get one chance at it. How do you describe 75 years in a minute and 48 seconds? You know, I don't know how you do that. And so, yeah, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure.
So I think that's about it with the conversation of Hollywood Park. If you do want more about Hollywood Park, and obviously you can hear Vic Stauffer in this, but go on YouTube and you can watch a documentary that was made by Hollywood Park about the history of the venue. It's called 75 Sensational Years at Hollywood Park. I will leave a link to it in the video description, and I'll also tweet out a link to it at some point, so definitely go check that out. Alright, I do just have to clarify, Vic Stauffer did have to leave for a couple of minutes because Tyler was running in the first race at Ellis Park, but getting back to what we were talking about, after Hollywood Park, you got the opportunity to become a race caller at Oaklawn Park in 2017. What was your what did you do in your time between working at Hollywood Park and getting to become the lead race caller at Oaklawn Park?
I did several things. I was a California state steward for a while, and that was very, very interesting, very fun. I enjoyed it a great deal. It felt like it was one of the jobs that I could actually give something back to the industry by being a racing official, and I did that until the end of 2015. And after that, I had when you're a steward, you can't bet on the races, and I've been a handicapper my whole life, and I wanted to try handicapping at the elite level, and I wanted to play handicapping tournaments at the highest level against the best handicappers in the world. And so for 2015 and 16, and really up until this day, I started doing that. And once you start handicapping and betting again on the races, you can't be a steward. So I walked away from being a steward and concentrated on being a handicapper, and that's gone very, very well. And other than that, I've dabbled in some other things. I owned a piece of a independent league baseball team, and did lots of things. But basically, what I was doing up until I was hired at Oaklawn Park was trying to see how I could do handicapping around the country, and it went very, very well.
You did get the position at Hollywood Park. How excited were you to be back in the mix calling races again?
Well, I was tremendously excited because, to be honest with you, when Hollywood Park closed, I thought I was through being a race caller. Because when you call 350 Grade 1 races and you're effectively playing center field for the LA Dodgers, you're not going to go back to Albuquerque. And so I wasn't going to take a job at a racetrack where I wasn't calling the caliber of horses. No disrespect to the smaller racetracks, but I needed that to really feel like I was adding to my career rather than just sort of staggering to the wire. And so I really wasn't all that proactive with seeking jobs. But when Oaklawn came available, that was an instant fit for me, because the racing at Oaklawn is commensurate to the racing at Hollywood Park, with the Racing Festival of the South and the Arkansas Derby and the Apple Blossom and some of the big races they run. And so, to be honest with you, I will tell you, and I'll deny I ever said this, but at meets like Oaklawn or Hollywood Park, whether you do good or bad, basically boils down to a half dozen calls at a meet. And if you call the Hollywood Gold Cup and the American Oaks and the Swap Stakes, well, you had a good meet. Or if you call the Arkansas Derby, the Rebel, and the Apple Blossom, well, you had a good meet. The rest of them don't matter so much. Not to say that they're not important, and not to say that I know that people are betting on the races and I try to do the best possible job. But if I call every single race for 57 days at Oaklawn Park absolutely flawlessly, and I screw up the Arkansas Derby, that's all they're going to remember. So when you're at the level that I'm at. So when I knew that I could come back and call races like the Arkansas Derby and see horses like Classic Empire and Magnum Moon and some of the horses that have gone through there, then Oaklawn became a perfect and easy fit for me, and I love it there.
Now, recently you were hired by Tyler Bays to be his agent until the meeting at Oaklawn begins in 2020. You had been an agent before. How long it had been since you had been an agent, and what were your thoughts going into it as delving back into that world?
Yeah, it had been about 9 years. Actually, the person that I was an agent for 9 years ago was Tyler Bays in California, and that's how we knew each other. And before that, I had Martin Garcia, and before that, I had Joel Rosario in California. And when Tyler got hurt at Del Mar in the summer of 2010, and we knew he was going to be out for the better part of a year, maybe even longer. It turned out to be almost 2 years that he was on the sidelines. And during that time is when I started to explore being a steward, and I became a steward. So when Tyler came back, I didn't take the opportunity to go back to work for him. It was a tough decision to make, but I had moved on at that point. But we always kind of knew that at some point we may hook up again. And about 6 weeks before Oaklawn ended this year, he called me And he really saw the writing on the wall in California, and with all the dysfunction that's going on out there, I think a little earlier than some other people. And he said, you know something, I probably need to make a change. And I said, well, why don't you come to Oaklawn? Why don't you come and ride the last 6 weeks here, and I'll hook you up with an agent, and we'll see how it can go. And he loved it and did fairly well, won 8 races. And so that evolved into going to Churchill Downs, and he did that, and it went very, very well. For the first time riding in Kentucky, where the totem pole is very well carved for many decades, he finished 10th in the standings with 17 wins and won 2 graded stakes. And to be a first-time Churchill Downs rider, you really couldn't have expected more than that. And it caught the eyes of the right guys, the main right guy being Steve Asmussen, the Hall of Famer. And he approached Tyler and I and asked if we would be willing to ride first call for him at Ellis Park. His normal first call rider, Ricardo Santana, follows Steve's horses to Saratoga. So the Kentucky string needed a first call rider, and we jumped at the opportunity. And it's such a big deal to ride first call for Steve that Tyler decided to forego riding Del Mar, which is an amazing thing when you consider it, to ride 3 days a week here in Kentucky. But the reason he did it is because he's riding everything for Steve Asmussen, and that's the kind of relationship that if you can foster that, it can put you in the Hall of Fame.
Vic Stauffer joining me for a couple more moments. If you are interested in learning more about Vic Stauffer or hearing more about him, he does run it. He does have a handicapping website, vicstauffer.com. You can find him on Twitter at goofonroof. I will tweet out a link to that if you're interested in following him. The last question that I like to ask all my guests on here is, if you could go back in time to any moment in the history of horse racing and be there to witness it firsthand, what would that moment be? And if you need any examples, Chantel Sutherland, we had her on last week. Her moment was going back to see Ruffian. Julie Crone said that she would go back to see Steve Cawthon win the Triple Crown in 1978.
Yeah, it's interesting that Chantal said that, because I'm surprised she didn't pick the Hollywood Derby or the Hollywood Gold Cup when she became the first woman in 75 years to win it on Game on Dude for Bob Baffert. But that's kind of a cool thing. I think that for me, what I would do is I would go back in time and maybe stand in the announcer's booth with Harry Henson when he called Vigors the White Tornado, winning the Del Mar Handicap at Del Mar. I want to say that was probably early 70s, and to be around that and to have gotten to know Harry at that point in his career, and that would have allowed me to know him for longer if he got to go back. I'm a race caller, and some people think I was pretty good at it, and I can promise you I would not have been a race caller without Harry. So I would think that I'd something to do with being part of
to make up.
the legions of iconic race calls that he made.
From
and,
his rail post position,
when I remember him calling Vigors the White Tornado down the stretch at Del Mar,
he is on the move.
Might have been at Hollywood Park,
Improbable
was one of
all
the
the way
two,
up within
but,
a length of the lead.
That's something
Galilean has
that I'll
5
never
to
forget,
close.
and
Then comes
I
Country
think I would
House
like to have
4
been there
wide,
for that.
Tickfin Flew, Laughing
All right,
Fox,
Vic
and
Stauffer,
the
thank you for
Trailer
joining.
6-shooter in Omaha
My pleasure.
Beach,
Call
and
anytime.
Improbable Omaha Beach, 3/4 of a length. Improbable attacks on the outside, and these two have sprinted 3 lengths clear of Long Range Toddy. Then comes Laughing Fox, Omaha Beach. Improbable in second. Omaha Beach is now a length in front. Improbable gonna try him one more time. Omaha Beach, Improbable to the outside. Omaha Beach just won't let him by yet. Improbable second. Omaha Beach, yes!